Remember when James Bond was the epitome of cool? The tuxedo, the Aston Martin, the smirk that could silence a room. He wasn't just a guy, he was a symbol. A spy. A walking fantasy of what it meant to have suave, a dangerous tone, and effortless masculinity. Oh boy, the 60s really dated on this guy. For decades, Bond didn't just chase trends, he set them. He was the guy that every man wanted to be, and the man that every missus wanted to sleep with. And every villain wanted to kill the shit out of him. A martini in one hand and a gadget in the other, and not a hair out of place. He always had the right line and the perfect timing and the smooth exit, thanks to a smattering amount of writers. Even kids growing up in the 90s knew his name. Not from the big screen, but from their living rooms. That's right guys, I'm talking about GoldenEye 007 on the Nintendo 64. And it turned Bond into a multiplayer icon. Kids today playing Call of Duty would not understand the impact of it. They would look at the cartridge and think it was a sex toy. And then suddenly, the fantasy was playable. You weren't just playing Bond, you were Bond. I mean, silent takedowns in the facility. Slappers only in the stack. He wasn't just cinema anymore, he was culture. But times change everything. By the late 90s, something started to shift, and the world had moved on completely. Masculinity was redefined, and the Cold War was over. And suddenly, the tux really didn't quite fit the same. And that's because 1997 happened. A swinging, sex-crazed British relic named Austin Powers burst into the cinema with a cheeky grin and a mojo to burn, baby. He didn't just poke fun at James Bond, he ripped the whole fantasy apart. He wasn't the spy we deserved, but he was the mirror we needed. Because the truth was, Bond wasn't bulletproof anymore. He was vulnerable, predictable, and maybe, just maybe a little ridiculous. This is the story of how one absurd, outrageous, groovy little shit didn't just parody James Bond, he shattered him. With bad teeth, bigger jokes, and with the courage to laugh at a legend that the world had worshipped for far too long. But before we get into this video fully, we have to understand the golden age of Bond and what it really was. James Bond first hit the big screen in 1962 with Dr. No, and almost overnight he wasn't just a spy, he was the spy. Sean Connery defined the role with ice-cold confidence and lethal charm. The world was split down the middle, paranoia was currency, and Bond offered something that we didn't know we needed. A man who was always in control, always a step ahead, and never afraid to pull the trigger, or pour a drink. He was power without consequence, masculinity without an apology, an international man of mystery before the phrase became a punchline. As the decades rolled on, Bond evolved, or at least adapted. Roger Moore gave us a little bit more of a different culture, a raised eyebrow and a wink, turning espionage into something more like high-stakes theatre. Timothy Dalton steered things back towards grit, but even then the formula didn't budge much. The villains got more cartoonish, the gadgets got more ludicrous, the innuendos more groan-worthy. Still, the core remained intact. Girls, guns, and gadgets. The 3 Gs. Reminiscent of the 3 Bs. Bikes, beers, and booty. Bond was never meant to be realistic. He was fantasy wrapped in a suit. A bulletproof man for an anxious world, particularly in the 60s. A walking, talking daydream where the good guy never dies, the car never runs out of gas, and the punchline always lands right after the punch. And audiences, we ate it up. We wanted to believe in Bond. Even when he drove an invisible car. Even when he served a CGI tidal wave. Pierce Brosnan. Even when he faced off against villains with laser satellites and underground ice palaces, we suspended belief. We went along with it, not because it made sense, but because Bond was a sense for a while. He was the cinematic constant, suave, stoic, untouchable, and no one dared to question him. I mean, not seriously. Not until a certain velvet-clad swinger came along with a mojo and a magnifying glass and asked the question nobody had the nerve to say out loud. Isn't this a little bit too much? Then came Austin Powers, international man of mystery. It hit theaters in 1997 like a glitter bomb. Goofy, loud, and unapologetically absurd. Created by Saturday Night Live's legend, Mike Myers, Austin was a bizarre cocktail of British mod culture, psychedelic flair, and unfiltered libido, with a bad set of teeth and an even worse sense of boundaries. But under all the shag carpets and catchphrases was something more potent than just a punchline. Austin wasn't just a parody, he was a sledgehammer. He didn't gently tease the spy genre, he walked in swinging. What was once sleek and serious was suddenly garish and goofy. World domination plots, deadly henchmen, given names like Random Task or Fat Bastard, evil masterminds. I mean, look at Dr. Evil for God's sake, he only wanted $1 million. and he held a cat and pet it. He even had a minion called Mini-Me. We all knew about Mini-Me, I'm not going to remind you of what that is. Austin didn't mock Bond from outside. He dismantled him from within. He was Bond, just warped into a funhouse mirror of satire. The women, the gadgets, the villains, and the smug deduction, it was all there, but soaked in irony. I mean, today, can you imagine asking a woman if she was horny? What had once been cool was now completely cringe. What had once been fantasy now looked like a farce. And here's the thing, it actually landed. Audiences laughed loud, because deep down, we knew. We'd spent years, from really the 70s onwards, watching Bond deliver the same lines, sleep with the same women, and save the world with the same toys. We just stopped noticing how silly it all became. I know that my last video jumped in on the importance of nostalgia, but what Austin Powers was saying that many of us were too nostalgic or polite to say was, wait a minute, this is kind of stupid. And the laughter didn't just sting, it stuck. Because satire only really hurts when it's true. Austin turned the tuxedo into a costume. He exposed the game, calling out the cliches, and left us with the realization that couldn't be unseen. Maybe James Bond wasn't timeless. Maybe he was just outdated, and no one had dared to tell him. Now we have to start talking about the fallout. When Austin Powers hit theaters in 1997, James Bond was being played by Pierce Brosnan, the suaviest Bond since Connery, with a jawline chiseled by the gods, and a delivery smooth enough to sell anything. His debut in GoldenEye was a triumph. He looked like David Duchovny with a dental operation. A bold reboot for a post-Cold War. It had style, tension, and a sense of relevance. Bond was back, and then the cracks began to show. Tomorrow Never Dies tried to modernize Bond through media moguls and remote-controlled cars. The World Is Not Enough gave us nuclear physicists in cocktail dresses and villains who couldn't feel pain. Die Another Day? That gave us invisible cars, ice palaces, and CGI parasailing. A fever dream of over-the-top nonsense. Something fell off. The humor felt robotic, the action was bloated, and the villains completely forgettable. And the charm? It started to curdle into self-parody, like Bond was playing Bond in a Bond movie. But here's the thing, Bond's world always relied on one fragile illusion, credibility. It didn't have to be realistic, but it had to feel real enough to believe in the fantasy. But after Austin Powers, that illusion shattered. When Dr. Evil spun around in a big chair, cradling a hairless cat and demanded $1 million, we weren't just laughing at him, we were laughing at Blofeld. At every Bond villain who ever monologued their plan before execution, at every gadget too absurd to be practical, except for the explosive pen. I thought that was really neat. At every henchman with a nickname and a gimmick. Austin didn't introduce the ridicule. He merely made it explicit. He showed us the strings, the seams, and the formula. And once you've seen the puppet shown from the backstage, it's hard to lose yourself in the illusion again. Bond didn't get worse. He just got exposed. The same way an old magician loses his audience when somebody finally explains the trick. Suddenly, Bond felt like a relic, a legacy brand from MGM trying to stay relevant in a world that had moved on. He still wore Armani, but it started to look like a costume. He still drank martinis, but now it felt more like a ritual than a rebellion. And here's the paradox. Once the world laughed at Bond, it was harder to admire him, and even harder to kind of fear him. Because nothing deflates a legend faster than a really, really good joke. But as we know, there is a silver lining. The reinvention through humiliation. After Austin Powers exploded into pop culture, after he danced across the grave of every spy cliche with a velvet jumpsuit and a "yeah baby," my impression's really bad. James Bond was left standing in the harsh light of parody, exposed, mocked, and kind of vulnerable. And with nowhere to hide behind quips or gadgets, the truth was clear. Bond could not coast on nostalgia. He'd become a caricature. And worse, everyone knew it. He had to evolve or fade into irrelevance. The choice came in 2006 though, a full reboot, a clean slate. That slate was Casino Royale. This is where we're introduced to Daniel Craig, in my opinion, one of the best Bonds there is. All rough edges, cold stares, no gadgets, no invisible cars, no cheeky one-liners. The Bond blend. This Bond bled. He bruised, he loved, and he lost. He made mistakes. He got things wrong. This was not a fantasy anymore, this was consequence. Casino Royale stripped down Bond to the raw core. Gone was the untouched super spy. In his place was a man, a killer, yes, as we're introduced to in the first scene, but also a human being torn between duty and desire, rage and restraint. He wasn't the man every guy wanted to be. He was the man every guy feared becoming. Flawed, haunted, trying to do good in a world that did not care. And it worked. Casino Royale did what most things in Hollywood cannot do today. It was a critical and commercial reset. Not just for the franchise, but for the idea of what Bond could be. It reminded us that espionage isn't glamorous, that sex and violence have an emotional cost. That women in Bond's world deserve agency, not just screen time. That maybe the real strength wasn't in the smirk, but in the silence after the pain. But here's the twist. This reinvention, this stripped back, emotional, mature, culturally relevant Bond, it may never have existed without Austin Powers. Because sometimes, to rebuild a myth, you have to tear it down first, and Austin did that. He took the Bond formula and threw it off a cliff. And only after it crashed and burned did the franchise realise what was worth salvaging. Not the gadgets, not the girls, not the tropes. Just the man and the mission, and the weight that comes with both. Some will say Austin Powers didn't even destroy James Bond. That Bond was always evolving. That satire doesn't kill, it just mocks. That maybe Bond needed time to catch up with the world. But let's not kid ourselves here. Austin didn't just poke fun, he held up a mirror. A loud, glitter-covered, soul-searching mirror. He took every lazy trope, every paper-thin female character, every overused gadget, and every smirk-doubled entendre, and made them laughable. Bond could no longer coast on style alone. Legacy wasn't enough. He had to earn our respect again. He had to grow up. And to his credit, he did. The modern Bond, bruised, burned, and brutally human, owes as much to Mike Myers as he does to Ian Fleming. Because without Austin Powers, without the ridicule, without the wake-up call, Bond might still be riding invisible cars across melting ice palaces, sipping martinis while the world around him changed. Okay, maybe not the same because again we've evolved, and maybe something could have happened, we don't know. But instead we got something better. We got a Bond who felt, who broke, who bled, and who learned. And I'm gonna be honest with you, it came at the right time. And in that transformation, the character found something far more compelling than invincibility, authenticity. So yes, Austin Powers made us laugh, but more importantly, he made Bond listen. He made us all take a step back and ask, do we really need another flawless man in a tuxedo saving the world with a pun? Because sometimes it takes a joke to tell the truth. And sometimes the truth is, the fantasy had to die, so the man could live. So here's to Austin Powers, the shagadelic assassin of outdated heroes. The mojo-fueled wrecking ball who spun, thrust, and yeah, babe. Sorry. Please don't make fun of me in the comments for that. He didn't just mock James Bond, he challenged him. He danced so hard he knocked 007 off his pedestal. It made us realise that even legends can get stuck in time. He was ridiculous, he was loud, he would have been in handcuffs today. He was a cartoon in a world of cool. But beneath the ruffled shirts and the terrible teeth was a deeper truth. That sometimes it takes a joke to expose what we've stopped questioning. That progress sometimes begins with a punchline. Because the truth is this, the fantasy had to die, so the man, the real man, could finally live. So to all my whizburgers out there, raise a martini glass, or a cup of English breakfast tea, and toast the spy who shagged the status quo, the hero we didn't expect, the clown who saved the king, Austin Powers.